Hi, my name is James Ikeda from the Bummer City Historical Society, and I wanted to take time, a little bit of time today to talk about the Day of Remembrance. Today is February 19th, 2017, which means it has been 75 years since President Franklin Delano Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066, which laid the legal foundation for Japanese internment during the Second World War. Just to give you something of a background about the basics, 9066 basically gave Henry Stimson, who was the Secretary of War at the time, the authority, and anyone who he delegated authority to designate military zones, quote-unquote military zones, anywhere in the country. And anywhere that was designated a military zone, it would be legal to exclude any and all, that's the language from the executive order, exclude any and all people from that zone. This was designed to allow for the exclusion of Japanese Americans from the West Coast, and this was put into effect within 2 months of the executive order by April of 1942. In the Japanese community, Japanese American community, we refer to this as the Day of Remembrance, and it's long been something which has been overlooked in the mainstream narrative of American history, and even as people today have begun to remember more, and as it's become a part of our narrative, our accepted narrative, there are still some issues with the way that we remember internment, which is what I wanted to address today. It tends to be that when we think about internment, we have these images of people being rounded up and brought out of their homes and the boxes in the street, and people with closed businesses being brought into camps, and the barbed wire and the machine guns, and we hear stories about children going to the bathroom with the machine gunner and the light pointed at them at night, and all these sort of horrible things. But there's one element to this which I think does not really get enough discussion, and which I think is really central to our understanding, particularly today. And that is the way that loyalty is discussed in the context of internment. The rationale for internment was that the Japanese, you could not discern if they were loyal or not. That by virtue of their ethnicity, you could not tell if a Japanese American citizen was loyal or disloyal. And this was, for all the sort of smoke and mirrors of the dialogue, the reality is this was a racial question. Asian Americans have long lived with a condition of perpetual foreignness and perpetual otherness. And this is what made it so that sort of FDR and others did not believe you could really decide whether or not the Japanese were loyal. The way that this gets talked about, typically, is by contrasting that uncertainty about the loyalty of the Japanese by then pointing out the fact that not a single person who was interned was found to be actually a spy, or there was no real cause for this, because the idea was that you would find Japanese-American fifth columns, which did not happen. It simply didn't happen at all, and people bring that up and will then say, and the Japanese in the camps were ultimately American, built schools and built sort of civic societies and sort of their own government systems and all these other things. And we play up the fact that the Japanese in the camps were quintessentially American. What gets erased when we say this, though, when we focus on that, is the fact that there was protest. And there was a lot of protest. Fred Korematsu was not the only person who resisted. And when we focus on the hyper-American, the quintessential American behavior of the majority of the Japanese who were interned, we reveal our continued discomfort with protest as patriotic. And this is something which I think we as a country have to deal with very seriously in this moment. There has never been a time when Americans have truly felt comfortable with the idea that protest can be patriotic. Only after the fact do certain protest movements get allowed into the narrative as moral. Things like the Civil Rights Movement, the way that we remember the Civil Rights Movement of the mid-20th century today, watered down, whitewashed. We now accept that Martin Luther King Jr. and his protest was moral. But this was in no way the way that this was understood at the time. And we need to really take a hard look at the way that we talk about protest, about loyalty, about patriotism, about American identity in this moment. Because if we fail to acknowledge the fact that protest is not something that is part of our birthright as Americans, then we are failing to truly understand the gravity of our history. I would encourage all of you, if you have the time, to look up the text of Executive Order 9066 and to read it. And to also read the Supreme Court decisions. There was one, the majority opinion by Justice Black, and then there were 3 dissenting opinions, all of which are very illuminating. And I'd recommend reading through them and reflecting on the lessons they have to teach us in this moment in 2017, in the Trump era. And throughout today, please keep in your thoughts the Japanese American community, and keep in your thoughts the centrality of protest to our more shining moments as a country. Do not let us have to wait for 50 years or for 100 years to really understand the significance and the virtue of protest in this moment. Thank you.